I'm always intrigued by the fact that you are a sex therapist. And I know that you have to be a professional, but what are some of the craziest things, or what at least one is the craziest thing that you've heard in a sex therapy session without giving away any identity?
It's interesting. Periodically, I'll get clients that will come in who discover that they are interested in a new kink of some kind, whether it's spanking or whether it's being tied up or some kind of bondage or something like that they didn't realize, and now all of a sudden they want to introduce that into the sexual relationship they have with their partner, and their partner might come out of the blue, or they might be really uncomfortable with that. They want to try to be supportive, but they don't really know how. And so those will be the most interesting clients that will come through in trying to sort of find language to articulate what the kink is that they're interested in trying, how they introduce that to their significant other, and then how they begin to kind of navigate how that need can get met in the relationship, or if they decide to open up the relationship a little bit for those needs to be met. Like the process around that is definitely interesting and unique each time. It doesn't flow the same with all couples.
I can only imagine. So in your experience, just out of curiosity though, what made you decide that you wanted to be a sex therapist or a marriage counselor?
Well, interestingly, I used to work for the public defender office on death penalty cases specifically, and my supervisor at the time thought it would be good for me to get my therapy license, and I had the educational credentials already in place. I just needed to do there's a process that the licensure board sets forward in getting additional graduate level coursework, doing like 2,000 some clock hours with clients and doing supervision and taking an exam. And so she wanted me to be able to possibly testify as an expert witness. And so that's how I kind of got into the therapy world. And then once I started sitting with clients, I really loved it and actually shifted out of the legal world into private practice. Then all of my clients wanted to talk about sex. And so I was like, well,
so it's the clients that wanted to talk about sex.
Well, I certainly have always been curious about and fascinated with human sexuality and pleasure, but I wanted to be a competent source of information for my clients. And so I was like, well, this keeps coming up in conversation. Let me go ahead and get some certification around that. And that's what I did. And then that just really became kind of a passion of mine, and just really creating safe space for folks to talk about pleasure and body and intimacy and all the vulnerability that goes along with that, and helping folks live their best life when it comes to all of those things.
So just one thing that comes up for me from time to time, particularly before I was married, or even actually since I've been married, people's perception of what a pastor is. So do you run into those things, being on one hand a sex therapist, on the other hand being an ordained United Methodist pastor or deacon, but specific, you're a pastor?
Yeah. It is often confusing to folks. I don't know if that's...
Thank you for keeping that. It's the battery, but okay. Oh, we're still going. It's okay. Let me just add. So tell me, do you run into any difficulty or challenges with people knowing that you're both a pastor and a sex therapist?
It often is confusing to folks. They hear both of those things. Okay, you're ordained, your title is reverend, but then you're also a sex therapist? That I think is often confusing for folks, which is unfortunate that there's been this divide between clergy and laity, in that clergy, we can't say certain things around them, or we shouldn't admit certain things around them because they might get offended or whatever. And I just think that's ridiculous, and it's unfortunate, to the point that when I'm in a social setting, I will often order a cocktail, say a curse word, and make some kind of commentary about sex as quickly as possible so we can get all that out of the way, so we can actually just be human beings together. Right. I think that's just part of what it means to be a modern day clergy, is to try to disrupt that divide as much as possible.
That's interesting, because I run into that, like where I've been out, when I said before I was married, and I remember being in a bar and I was having a drink and someone was like, "You drink?" And I was like, "Yes." And they were like, "Well, do you date?" And I'm like, "Well, yes, I want to get married. Yes, I have to date." But another issue that I run into, and I'm wondering if it's the same for you, is the whole idea of being bivocational. So people are oftentimes confused, like, well, are you a lawyer or are you a minister. And I'm like, well, I'm both. Have you ever felt any conflict between the two in yourself? And do you ever feel that you get that sort of response from other people?
I definitely get that response from other folks. My identities as both a therapist and as a pastor are deeply intertwined. Although I don't advertise myself, nor do I conduct myself as a Christian therapist per se. I'm a therapist. I've got clients of all different traditions and religious belief systems or not. And my job as a therapist is to meet them where they are in their own belief system and try to not judge and be a safe space and help with the therapeutic process. But I don't have any conflict about that internally, but folks are curious about that, particularly with being a sex therapist specifically and a pastor like that, because there's such a dichotomy in the Christian tradition specifically about the difference between sort of body and spirit. That body is bad somehow and spirit is good, and that there's this sort of false divide between those two things. And a lot of that's based on some of the early writings in the Christian tradition, the New Testament, and also just some of the thinkers like, Augustine and Thomas Aquinas and some of these other people that wrote formative documents at the beginning of the Christian tradition that sort of separated out, spirit, mind from body and earth.
I personally blame Paul, but go ahead.
Paul represents both the best and the worst,
He
I think,
does.
of our tradition. He said such beautiful things and also some really harmful things, but such is the human spirit. I mean, we all are very complicated people
Right.
with mixed motivations about everything. But I think another thing I'll say about that is just that the trend now, just not just in sort of I think just in general, is multiple sources of income, multiple hats. I mean, that is kind of the way of the future, is that we don't have to be confined to one particular job or career for the duration, that there is a lot more freedom to be able to work from home and wear two different hats, or to generate a little side hustle, to generate some extra money or whatever, and to try to do things that resonate with spirit, like to have a profession that we can really feel excited about, and it doesn't feel as much like work. I mean, that is available to everybody now.
Yeah, I know, and I just to piggyback on what you're saying, because one of my concerns has been I have never wanted to be completely reliant on a church or a denomination for my income, because I feel like it puts some restraints on my theology, and I think it would limit some of the things that I could do or say. And I don't want to go too deeply into this, but I know you're United Methodist, so you all have. And I looked at United Methodist for a while, but I just decided I didn't feel comfortable having to conform to the Book of Discipline and somebody else's theology. But did that play a role into your deciding to be bivocational?
I think it was definitely an added bonus. Not being held financially hostage to the institution offers a lot of freedom to be able to speak the truth in love, of course. But if my only source of income is my salary as a pastor, then sometimes that factors into I might choose to address an issue in a different way that isn't as authentic, quite frankly, because I'm worried about my livelihood. And I think a lot of we're having this huge debate right now, like we have been for the past 3 decades, about homosexuality and human sexuality in the United Methodist Church. I am a gay man. I make no apology or secret about that. But that alone is a violation of the Book of Discipline. And I know that, and that's just, but I'm able to live my authentic self and live into my calling as a pastor partly because I have a private practice and I'm not worried about the church starving me, and not that I'm trying to be, subversive or to intentionally break rules, but I mean, I was born and raised in a United Methodist tradition, and so it's just as much my church as it is anybody else's, and I'm not going anywhere.
Right.
And
just for clarity, right now, and it could have changed since I took United Methodist polity, the Book of Discipline now says that, and I'm paraphrasing, it's okay to be gay, but you're not supposed to say anything, kind of like a don't ask, don't tell.
And that has been sort of the default, kind of a don't ask, don't tell. Like it used to be that you were only considered gay or a self-avowed practicing homosexual, as they put it, if you say it to a bishop, to a district superintendent to a board of ordained ministry or to a couple of different other things. And if you don't say it to those particular groups, then it doesn't exist. Now they've recently passed some legislation that says if you said it publicly anywhere, then you're guilty of being self-avowed practicing homosexual.
So then you're guilty.
I'm guilty. But it's still being litigated, so we'll see what the future holds.
Great. Well, thank you, Josh, so much. Appreciate you, and thank you all for listening.